Marty.
I don't know how conscious the decision to become filmmakers in quotation marks ever was, as opposed to it being something that we just kind of started out as play and then kind of developed into play that someone else was paying for, I guess. But we've been making movies, little movies, since we were kids, since we were teenagers. At a certain point, I guess it became a little bit conscious because I went to film school, I guess, hoping to keep doing it. But
who's the DP who just dropped dead? He dropped dead a few months ago. They asked him when he became interested in photography, and he said, "Not yet. The only skill I had coming out of school was typing." And they pay you more for what they call statistical typing, typing just numbers as opposed to words that pay you more because that's even more boring. So that was my career.
And I was working as an assistant to an editor in New York City, a film editor who was doing mostly like industrials and low-budget independent horror movies, splatter movies, sort of the more extreme kind of independent horror movies of the late 70s, early 80s that were really grand guignol, like lots of spraying blood, which was a lot of fun, actually, at the time. She was an interesting sort of mentor, in a way, to both of us because we learned something about how the movie business worked and how you put a feature film together. The story itself was sort of a bit of a mashup between things we'd read about sort of true crime, things that had happened in Texas, and kind of hard-boiled literature we had read at the time and were kind of putting those things together. So
it was all written with the idea towards, we were going to make it ourselves, so we needed it to be modest, cheap in terms of production. You know what I mean? Very kind of contained, small cast, not a lot of locations, not a big production. So with that sort of constraint in mind, and sort of with the idea that we could sell it presented as an exploitation movie.
Right, and that's true. In that respect, it was also sort of, the story itself was sort of influenced by the fact that we were sort of friendly with people and working on horror films, but we didn't want to do a horror film per se, or we sort of bent it more in the direction of a murder thriller than a horror film, but it certainly had those elements. I wouldn't say that Red Harvest was so much an influence as a story on Blood Simple as it was, although it was very much an influence on a later movie that we did on Miller's Crossing. Hammett, and as Ethan was saying, James M. Cain in this case, because he was a little boy. His books are, more than Hammett's, often stories about murder that happens in families, husbands and wives, people having affairs, those kind of overheated domestic things that then morph into murder stories.
We just seen Emmett Walsh's work in a bunch of movies, notably Straight Time, this movie he did with Dustin Hoffman, that he was very funny in. So we wrote a part for Emmett, not knowing him, and sent it to him kind of just blindly, on a lark, on a hope, and he, for whatever reason, agreed to do it.
So I read the script of Blood Simple. It was kind of funny, and it all took place at night, which is very hard to shoot. You have no depth at night, and it's kind of it's hard. Yeah, it takes a career to learn how to shoot at night. So they were shooting at night. The character was this Sidney Greenstreet type of thing. He had this Panama hat and his yellow suit and the whole thing. And I looked at it and I said, "This is, I could kind of work on this and flesh it out and then the 30 years do it in a real movie. You know, this way I can kind of use it as a rehearsal process. So I came back to my agent and said, yeah, I'm kind of interested. Find out what they got. And they said, they got no money, but they'll give you 5% of the profit. And I said, I have a degree in business administration. I mean, X times 0 is X. I mean, there's going to be no profits. Yeah, I said, well, come on. So they went back and they came back the next day and they said, they will give you 5% of the gross. And I said, you went from profit to gross in one day? I said, it still means nothing. There'll be no money. I was in Dallas shooting Silkwood with Meryl Streep. And I went down to Austin, Texas, where they were, to see them on a weekend. And they showed me their little demo film that they'd put together, these two brothers, Joe and Ethan Coen. I met them, and they said what they would do is they would give me, I don't know, $200 or $300 a day for expense money. They couldn't pay me, you know. And I got myself in all kinds of trouble. I got down there and they gave me a check for, you know, 3 or 4 days, you know, $800 or $900. And I said, I don't know who you people are. I don't want your check. I want cash, you know. So they gave me $100 bills and I put them in my pocket. And then every time, you know, more $100, and it kept getting thicker and thicker and thicker. And suddenly I realized everybody might be looking at my pocket. I got paranoid. And where could I leave it back in this hotel room? And you put it in the ice cube tray underneath, you know, it became a whole another piece of my brilliant, you know, mathematical background into this huge wad of bills. Visser had this yellow Sidney Greenstreet type of suit that the wardrobe girl found, and it became one of the things that's been noted for years. That and the kind of the Panama hat, and it was a character. I used it for the character and the whole thing. They had written the script. They'd been working on it for 2 years. It came out of Minnesota. Joel Coen, the older, had been a film major at NYU. Ethan was a literary graduate from Princeton. They were like 27 and 20 and 25 years old at the time. They only had X number of dollars and X number of time. And there wasn't a lot of fooling around. You had to do it this way or that way. Joe would set up the shot that they're going to look, and Ethan would come over looking at Lambert. They talk about, you know, they work together as one. They have their own language. They communicate to one another. You don't know what they're up to for the most part. You know, the other people in the cast were all very good, well-trained New York stage actors that had been doing film. Danny Hedaya, who I killed. You know, Danny was doing very well and did very well since. Fran McDormand just got out of Yale Drama School, and you know, she was a very fine stage actress.
Many of us started in the first 3 films, and it ruined us for life, for one thing, because it set a bar so high for what a film set is like and what a script can be and what a collaboration with the filmmakers can be, that often many of us are chasing that again and have chased it through our entire careers. But I think that part of what made Blood Simple happen was the audacity of it. It was purely audacious that they sat down, they wrote a script, raised the money, got a group of people together, and we all pulled it off. But I think that comes from their innate brilliance as storytellers. They knew that it was a really good calling card. People were going to see slashers, people were seeing horror films, they were great students of film noir. They knew that people were going to pay attention. When I moved to New York, I was sharing an apartment with another actor that I met at drama school. And his best friend from Chicago was living with Holly Hunter down the street, and we lived in the Bronx. And both my roommate and Holly Hunter had both auditioned for Blood Simple. And in fact, Joel and Ethan were very interested in casting Holly as Abby. But she had just gotten the big break of her career, which was taking over a role on Broadway. And she was going into a 6-month contract, and she said, You'll wait for me. And they said, no, well, we can't. Yes, you can. You'll wait for me. Because you, as she is wont to do, she was very clear that they needed to wait for her. They couldn't wait for her. They started auditioning again, and I was lucky enough to get an audition because I wasn't really in the same position as Holly then. They liked what I did in the audition. They asked me to come back later that afternoon to read with John Getz, who had been cast. I said, what time? They said 2. I said, I can't. Why not? Because my boyfriend at the time was having his first job on a soap opera. He had 2 lines. I wanted to watch it that afternoon. Well, when could you come back? Says Joel. I said, around 4. He goes, great. And subsequently, they both told me that that's why I got one of the reasons I got the job, because I didn't seem like I needed it that much. And I have to say, the lesson I learned from that is going into auditions, don't be too needy and have an agenda of your own. I took that script home in between meeting them at maybe 9 o'clock in the morning and going back at 4, and I didn't know how to read it. I kept seeing POV. I didn't know what POV was. I didn't know that POV meant point of view, and there was a lot of POV in that script. And then there were scenes of me, stabbing a man's hand to a windowsill. I'm like going, oh, great. And there were scenes where it was clear that I had just had sex with my lover, and so that to me meant, oh, I'm going to have to do nude scenes. So as a first opportunity, as a young, 24-year-old actress just out of drama school, it wasn't exactly the thing I thought would be the best thing to do. So I called Joel. I asked to speak with him. He called me back, and I said, okay, I just need to be clear about what's being expected of me. Do you see this as a nude scene? And he said, no, absolutely not. If that bothers you, don't worry about it. We're not selling this movie on sex. We're selling this movie through the violence. When I think back on it, Joel and Ethan's experience of women was not that vast at that time. And I think that actually there's a caricaturish aspect to Abby. She wasn't that three-dimensional. And weirdly, even though I was very unformed at the time, I look at my face, there was hardly anything to latch on to. But I think the one thing that I've always been able to offer them is a complexity that fills out an idea they have of something. It's not that she was a blank slate, but it was kind of the surface. And then whatever I had to bring to the table, or whatever questions I asked on the set, or whatever my relationship was with John Getz and the other actors, somehow made her more. I also think that I was really naive, and not only naive of the process of making films, but naive in general as a young woman. So I think that that was a choice that they made in casting me that also helped to tell their story in a different way.
The rest of the parts we just cast by auditioning people who were not necessarily completely unknown, some of them, but largely unknown, certainly not movie stars at that point. And some of them completely unknown, like Fran. She'd just gotten out of drama school.
It's kind of great looking for actors because it's such a saturated market with there are a lot of actors looking for work, and there are more.
It's definitely a buyer's market.
There are more good actors than there are good parts, so you get to see a lot of people.
Yep. It was financed along the lines, or in a similar way, to a lot of independent exploitation, mostly horror films were at that time, again, late 70s, early 80s, by forming a limited partnership and then approaching investors. In our case, they came from New York and the Midwest where we grew up, a little bit down in the South in Texas. Individual investors who would contribute a small amount of money for a sort of equity, small amount of equity in the movie and interest in the eventual profits, everyone hoped. That was the financial model, the legal model. And it took us a year or so to put together a group of something like 60 some, wasn't it?
Yeah,
60
something like that.
investors.
60 investors, roughly. But Sam Raimi had raised money for his movie. Joel worked on his first movie, and he was sort of a model in that respect. He'd raised money by making a trailer for his movie before the movie was made, kind of, pre-creating some scenes in the movie.
Actually, Sam did a Super 8
Well, he did a
feature
feature.
of the whole movie before he made it in 35 millimeter. So he actually, what we did was we took that idea and made a 2-minute trailer, and we would schlep it around to people's living rooms in 16 millimeter and show it on their walls.
Yeah, it'd be a big, if you solicit investment in a movie and all you've got is a prospectus or whatever, a piece of paper, most people won't even bother to talk to you. But at that point, when, before video and home video and all that sort of thing, just having a piece of film was I don't know.
Enough to get your foot in the door. We do storyboard everything, even though Werner Herzog says that storyboards themselves are the instruments of cowards. I think which I think we're happy to plead guilty to, right?
Yeah.
It's absolutely. We like to know what we're doing before we get on the set, and it scares us not to. So we do use storyboards a lot. The first day of working for us was not only the first time we directed something, but I think it's fair to say it's the first time either of us had ever set foot on a feature film set. And, there's something very odd about, just the number of trucks, the number of people, the number of, is a little bit, I wouldn't say it was intimidating, but it's a little shocking at first, especially if you're used to going out and monkeying around with Super 8 cameras, which was what we'd sort of done previously with just the two of us and a group of our friends. We were lucky to be working with people whom pretty much everyone had more experience than we did.
Yeah.
And was, helping us sort of learn how movie sets are run.
Especially, notably Barry Sonnenfeld, the director of photography, Mark Silverman, the producer.
And Debbie
Reinisch, the assistant director.
Yeah.
They were all kind of, not old hands, but, fairly, somewhat seasoned.
These were all people who, while they hadn't necessarily done features or many features, had some experience on professional movie sets. They'd done television or short after-school specials, or in some cases independent features, in some cases pornographic films, which is, where a lot of people in that era kind of, when they got out of film school, if you wanted to work and make some money, and, that's what you did.
What really strikes you is the pressure to make the day. You've got a certain amount of material to cover in the day. And I think we both found it kind of, it's a pressure, but it's, stimulating.
Yeah.
Since then, it's gotten to be more, the pressure is the same, and it's a little less, it's a little more of a grind. It's the same pressure.
It's less stimulating because it's the same old thing. You're used to it, and you know that's the imperative. But that is the reality of a film set. It's time, it's having the time. It's having to get it in the day. It's having the pressures of that many people working under a budget, not being able, you can't go back and do it again, or if you do, it's going to cost you lots of money. You could be jeopardizing the viability of the whole project. It's those kinds of pressures that once you get used to, they become more of a drag than they are a stimulation.
Yeah. But that's what making a movie is. That's what you don't realize until you actually do your first one. It's the pressure to make the day, get the scene in the day, get the coverage you have to get.
And stimulating is a good description of the films that we've done, just by virtue of the fact that it was the first, and you can't do it for the first time more than once. There've been lots of other movies we've had great time making, but that one felt different for that reason, really significantly different for that reason. We never looked on the movie as a whole, as a parody of the genre. You like a certain form, and then you try and do it yourself, and you bring whatever equipment you have personally to it, and it comes out, slightly different from what people might be used to, but it's, I think, unfair to call that a parody. You're sort of feeling your way into it, you know what I mean? And it isn't as if there's a design or a very specific design, or intellectually there's a design to it. You just make your decisions as you go along about when you light the scene, should it be more like this or more like that? When you compose the frame, how do you think that should work in this particular case to make the scene work, to tell the story? So it sort of emerges from that, as opposed to there being especially in Blood Simple, I think, a sort of conscious desire to impose a certain visual style.
You always have those kind of general discussions, and to some extent they're kind of, that is kind of what you do, and to some extent it's completely not. You go, when you're on the set, you go, well, I know what we talked about generally, but in spite of all that and ignoring all that, what feels right is this.
And then there was what Barry would let us do. Because Barry, you know, who I think it came out of an insecurity at some point, he didn't allow us to pan the camera. And he would say, well, I don't like panning. But in reality, he found it difficult to light both that area and that area over here, and didn't want to have it all in one shot.
It was unbelievable. Barry, the whole time we worked with him on 3 movies, and he would light one specific what the lens saw, and if you panned an inch left, you saw a flag or a fixture, a lamp. If you panned an inch the other way, you saw a fixture or a flag. I've
told that story to other DPs that we've worked with over the years. They all find it hilarious. To this day, Barry will say, no, I just don't like panning.
We cut it with a friend of ours, Don Wigman, and we would all, in the middle of the day, most days, we would all stretch out and take a nap on the floor of the cutting room. It was very relaxed.
And we brought it to all the sort of major companies, but they didn't really know what to do with it. And then it was shown both at the New York Film Festival and Toronto Film Festival, I guess, which is where this small company from Washington saw it, and Ben Barenholtz specifically, I think, saw it in Toronto. He was working for this company, Circle Films.
As was Jim Jacks, also working for Circle, but they saw it separately.
They saw it separately,
they both liked it.
So this little group picked it up and released it in the United States originally. We were in Sundance, I think, and Fran was being given something or other, some bowling trophy. And in connection with that, they screened the movie. We hadn't seen it really since it had been released, and thought, wow, I think, it's pretty poor material.
Could do with a little tightening up.
Do with a little tightening up. We may have learned a thing or two about editing in the intervening 10 years, and I think if we knew what we know now, we might have cut certain things a little bit differently, a little bit more skillfully. And why not go back in? I think it coincided with the release on home video of some sort. Why not go back in and do a director's cut, which in this case was about 10 minutes shorter than the original release of the movie. So, it was tinkering with it after the fact in a way that I think improved it.
As an experience, I think, I'm sure we both remember it really fondly. It was a lot of fun, as any first movie would have been or would be. It was just, it was a lot of fun to do.